talk a little bit about how you got into producing it?
Nah, you might as well chill, you know. Chill. Hey. I was gonna make the epic introduction, but introduction was epic. But yeah, man, this is one of the most legendary producers of all time of hip hop, an era that was very, very sensational and intimate at a time, especially being a British guy and looking at the whole American hip hop and rap scene. So once more, make some noise for Just Blaze.
Thank you.
Also, can you make some noise for Nana Rogues as well, please? I would say make some noise for me, but I'll be blowing my own trumpet, so don't.
Make some noise for Still Bangles.
Yeah, I can't believe I'm sitting next to Just Blaze though, blood. I swear to God, like, growing up as a fan in the UK and looking at, like, I'll essentially say Harlem because of the fashion and just associating the whole Dipset and movement entwined with Rockefeller. I was just like so inspired by the production, which I'm going to touch on, but I just wanted to say that it's a real honor sitting next to you right now, brother, man. That's crazy. So I think one of the most important questions I want to know, and I think you guys will agree with me, is what really made you get into producing and made you want to produce?
First of all, I grew up around music, you know, from the time I was a baby. And I was introduced to hip hop very early on. I had an older cousin who's about 7 years older than me. Yeah. And he lived around the corner from a record store. So he would buy records every weekend. Then, you know, me being kind of like his little brother, I would inherit them from him, you know, when the records got old. And at the same time, we were hearing, you know, you couldn't hear hip hop on the radio during the day, you know, back in that era. You had Friday nights and Saturday nights from 9 p.m. to midnight on two different stations. That was the only time you heard rap music, with the exception of like the occasional Run DMC song. And we would stay up on the weekends and record these shows on cassette every week. And that's when I really got introduced to hip hop and the art of DJing, because it was live DJing on the radio. And I really, if I had to really pinpoint what sparked it for me, was being really fascinated by the DJs that I was hearing on the radio. And from there, wanting to make music. I didn't even know what producing was, you know, what making beats was. Crazy. I was like 8 years old, you know, but I was fortunate that my dad was, in addition to growing up just around music all my life, between my older cousin, my mother was into various types of music. My aunt was an avid record collector, but my dad was played a jazz organ. So I grew up around somebody playing music all the time as well in the house. And he would buy various like Casio keyboards and different synthesizers and things like that. And when he wasn't looking, you know, or when he wasn't around, I would sneak and use his stuff. And, you know, when you're a little kid, you always think, you know, you're gonna get in trouble for touching your parents' things. And I remember one day I was playing one of his keyboards, and I looked to my right, and I see that my mom and dad are looking through the door like, what the hell? I must have been about 8 years old. And I'm thinking I'm gonna get in trouble. So I start crying, and they're like, no, keep going, keep. They had no clue that I could even play anything at all.
Crazy.
So the combination of growing up, being fascinated with DJing, and like in 6th grade, my mom bought me my first mixer from a chain that we had in the States called Radio Shack. Bought me my first DJ mixer, and she would buy me records for Christmas. And then Casio made like the first consumer sampling keyboard. It was called the SK1, and then the next version was the SK5, and it had like 4 seconds of sampling time and 4 drum pads. No sequencer or anything. But that's when I first started toying around with the idea of sampling. I was probably around 10 years old. And again, I used to sneak into my parents' stuff, and I would find her old records, her old Isaac Hayes records, her old Public Enemy record. I mean, I'm not Public Enemy. My mom was listening to Public Enemy. James Brown records, Isaac Hayes, things of that nature. And I was realizing that these songs that I was hearing on these records were the beats, like in these Public Enemy songs and things that I was listening to. And I realized, like, oh, they're actually taking these old records, and that's where the music is coming from. So from there, I started experimenting with sampling these records myself. And I guess that's when you can say I first started making beats, you know? And then from there, it was just a progression, you know? At some point, you know, midway through high school, my aunt bought me my first real piece of gear, which was a ASR-10 keyboard, which was a sampler. And I wanted that because at the time, Wu-Tang was the biggest thing in the world. And I remember reading an article with RZA saying, I do everything on the ASR-10. So I'm like, all right, if I want to make beats like RZA, I have to get an ASR-10. And I thought I was going to be the new RZA. I wasn't. That's really kind of like getting that ASR-10 is really what, I mean, there were a lot of points, a lot of different big points in my life, but that was the one that made me say, okay, like I can actually really do this. Because, you know, I'm using the same thing that one of the greatest of all time is ever using. And, you know, here's the thing, ultimately, it's, you know, I learned early on, it's not the machine, it's the man or the brain, you know. But I would say the other big turning point where I knew I wanted to be a DJ, aside from, you know, just hearing it all the time, hearing, you know, radios and DJs on the radio, was when I heard, a life-changing thing for me was when I heard Jazzy Jeff's Live at Union Square routine on their second album. And it was just a recording of them doing a party, and Fresh Prince is just talking, he's not even rapping, but Jeff is cutting the whole time. I remember that was the summer, I think, of '87. Crazy, and that's when I said to me, like, this is what I want. I was 10 years old, and I said, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life.
Insane, man. Moving on to onto the production side of things, do you think it helps being a DJ? Did it help you figuring out what type of beats to make and how to manipulate them and intertwine them? Is that something that's great? Because I know Ludacris was a DJ at some point. Right. I know some other producers that are some of the biggest producers today were DJs early on before they got into production. Right. Is that like a skill? Do you think that helps production? That's
where I learned everything. And that's why I always tell a lot of people who, excuse me, would like to be producers, you know, especially like in the hip hop world or in the dance world, I'm like, learn to be a DJ. You know, learn the art of DJing. Spend a year or two just studying that. You will inadvertently learn so much. Like, remember when, if anybody remembers the movie The Karate Kid, when Mr. Miyagi is just making Daniel wax on, wax off, and he's like, what am I learning? I'm waxing your car. But what he was teaching him was defense techniques. It's the same thing with DJing. Like, I learned so much about song structure, how to count beats and bars, from a technical standpoint, but also from my years of DJing. I started DJing in clubs when I was 15 years old.
So that means you was a great DJ then?
I was, yeah, I am a good DJ. But I was inadvertently not just learning the technical side of things, I was learning a lot about how music moved people.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that was the most important thing, was 100%. Learning, like, aside from what a kick drum is or what a snare drum is, but the programming, as I was DJing out for people from such a young age, I was learning how to take people on a musical journey. You know, and that was probably the most valuable thing that I learned from all those years of DJing. And eventually, for me, you go from playing other people's music to learning to make your own.
Insane, man. Now, that's interesting to know. I also wanted to ask you, from a producer's perspective, what was the first record that you felt like, that I'm now a serious producer and that I'm now in the industry? Kind of like, this is my job? Or was there ever that moment, or was you just lost in a moment? I'm still figuring it out. Still today? Yeah, I'm still trying to figure this shit out. I'll be honest, like, my first record I ever did, like, in this, like, you know, for an actual signed artist, went gold, you know, sold 500,000 copies in a month. That was with Mace back in like 1998. Crazy. I still had it, and after that, I started working with artists like Big Pun, Killer Priest from Wu-Tang, Tragedy, Gaddafi, a lot of legendary hip-hop artists. I still kept my day job. Because when you're young and you're still just figuring it out, you know, you feel like it could stop at any moment. You don't know if this is really what you're supposed to be doing. Maybe you just got lucky, you know. And it took, I used to work in a recording studio. And from 10 p.m. or 10 a.m. to 7 p.m.,
I had my day job. I was Justin Smith, the assistant studio manager. And then from 7 p.m. to like 9 a.m., I was Just Blaze in training. You know, but I was doing these sessions, and I was the studio that I was working at. I was also their second biggest client, and I was sleeping for like an hour here, an hour there, and it took my boss to pull me aside and be like, "Why are you still here?" And I'm like, "Well, because it's not 7 o'clock yet. I'm still on the clock." He's like, "No, why are you here? Why are you working?"
Yeah.
You know, he kind of forced me to quit because he was like, "Listen, you're achieving your dream at this point, and you working here is holding you back. Yeah. But also, you being up all night producing is affecting your work during the day. You don't need to have this. You don't need this job anymore." Yeah. But I was just so nervous that it might stop at any moment, you know. And I knew that as long as I had my day job, I would make my $500 a week and I could pay my rent. Yeah. You know. So eventually, I left that job, but I was still working there as a client. I was still working there all the time. And I guess if I had to say, okay, like, you know, I've actually made it, I guess it's like once I actually got in a room with Jay.
Jay-Z,
yeah, and we knocked out like 3 records in one day, and I'm like, oh.
The Blueprint?
Maybe this
was it that time?
No, this was the Dynasty
Before
album.
that?
The Dynasty album.
Oh, did I?
And I was like, oh, maybe this is a real thing. You know, by that point, I had a few gold records under my belt, but I still felt like I was still figuring it out. And you fast forward 20 years later, I am still figuring it out. You know, the second that you feel like you know everything is when you're on your way down.
That's great, man. That's great to see. That's very humble of you, to be honest, because what you've achieved is absolutely staggering. So how did you get in the studio with Jay-Z, and what was that moment like?
I'll give you the shortest version possible because it's kind of a long story, but
cool.
The short version, like I said, I was working in the studio. It was called The Cutting Room. And there was a client there who was a big name client. And his name was Bruce Hornsby, legendary piano player and singer. And he was working there quite often, so we developed a good rapport. And I used to answer phones sometimes in the studio, and he used to like prank call me. And he'd be like, "Hey, this is Joe Blow from Galaxy Records. You want to give you a record deal?" And I'm like, "What do you want, Bruce?" You know. And one day I get this phone call, and it's like, "Hey, can I speak to Just?" And I'm like, "This is him." And he's like, "Hey, my name is G. Roberson from Rockefeller Records. We want to have a meeting with you." And I'm like, "Yeah, very funny, Bruce." Click, and I hang up on him. And he calls back like, "Hey, I was trying to talk to Just, and I got disconnected." And I'm like, "Bruce, this isn't funny." He's like, "My name's not Bruce. My name is G. I'm an A&R from Rockefeller Records. I came across some demos of yours. I would love to sit down and have a meeting with you." And I'm like, "Oh shit, this is for real." Yeah. So I go to my boss and I'm like, "Yo, I gotta go." And he's like, "What do you mean you gotta go? You just came back from lunch." Yeah. And I'm like, "No, Jay-Z's label just called me. They said they want to have a meeting with me." And he's like, "Fuck, fine, go." So I leave work, go have the meeting, and they're like, "Listen, we're trying to start a production crew. We have a producer by the name of Buck Wild. We have this other guy, Rock Wilder. This new kid we just found named Kanye West, and we'd like you to be the 4th guy."
Crazy.
And I'm like, "Yeah, where do I sign?" Like, "You don't even have to sign anything. Just come to the studio." Okay. So for the first year or so, I was working on stuff with like Memphis Bleak and Beanie Siegel and Emil, and obviously getting to Jay was the goal. For the first year, Jay was paying me no attention at all. He'd always have like some kind of criticism, like, "Oh, the music is good, but the drums suck. The drums suck, but the music is good." And I was always getting that feedback.
Was that fueling you at that time?
Well, it was weird because I was always getting that feedback by a third party. Like I never got in a room with him.
Okay.
So it was like the message was relayed. Your beats suck.
Chinese whispers.
Yeah. And then eventually, my thing was like, if we just get in a room, I know we can make something happen. So I did a record. I came up with this one idea, sent it to the A&R on a cassette. Jay heard it, he loved it, he recorded to it right there on the spot. They sent me not the files, but they sent me a copy back.
How did you feel?
It was amazing. Like after a year and a half, he finally rapped on one of my beats, and then he was like, "Listen, tell that kid Just to come to the studio." Yeah. They had just built a new studio called Baseline, and I went in. He was working on another record, so while he was working, I put on the headphones, plugged in my MPC, and made another beat right there on the spot. So by the time he got out of the booth, I'm like, hey, check this one out. And I play it for him, and he's like, well, when did you make this? I'm like, oh, just now. He was like, you just made I was only in the booth for 10 minutes.
Crazy.
I'm like, yeah, I made it in 10 minutes. So he listens to it again. He's like, all right, I got the idea for this. He goes and he starts rapping.
Mad.
He goes in the booth, and then he stops, makes the engineer stop the music, and he's like, yo, listen, from now on, that room next door is yours. Stick around. I'm going to make you a star. Get to work.
Crazy. Make some noise for that. That is mental.
Hey.
That is fucking crazy.
Yeah, and then you fast forward 3 years later, I owned that studio.
Crazy.
Yeah. Literally, I bought it from the
Not you
owner.
just outright.
I outright bought it, yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah, it was. It's pretty amazing because 4 years before that, I was just interning in the studio, and I went. 4 years later, I own one that's better than the studio that I was interning in.
Crazy. That's insane. Would you say that you have your own signature sound, and what does it have to take for a producer to kind of stand out with their own style? Does it come with a personality? Does it come with a production approach? Does it come with, I don't know, the way you speak? Like, it's deeper than music for me. I feel like when I hear your sound, I know that's Just Blaze. Or when I hear Mustard, or I hear Timbaland or Dre, there's something in it, and I can't explain it.
I think for me, it's less about a particular sound and more about a particular energy.
Yeah.
There's a certain energy in my music, and I think that's what because you take like 3 of my biggest records, like Public Service Announcement, Oh Boy, Rock the Mic, and Lord Knows, right?
Crazy.
Those 4 records, none of them sound anything alike, but when you hear them, you can still tell that it's me.
Yeah.
And I think it's really just because of the high energy that's in the music.
Even on Drake's album, I knew it was you with the Ross record.
Right.
Take Care. Yeah.
Yeah, to Take Care was Lord Knows on Take Care.
I knew it was you straight away from the start. I said, that's Just Blaze.
Right.
Straight away, without even knowing.
Right, and I think it's really just an energy thing, more so than anything else. And I think in terms of my approach to production, I try to just keep a certain amount of energy, but also I like to create moments. I'm assuming that a few people in here, at least some of you are producers or or
songwriters and stuff.
We met. My approach, it's not necessarily I'm making a record for.
You're not scientific, like you're not like
right.
That
Yeah, there's
much
no
of
formula.
this.
But here's the thing: a lot of us, we get approached by record labels. They'll say things like, "We need a record for the club. We need a record that's a single. We need this. We need that." My thing is, there's no formula to that because all 4 of those records I just mentioned were big records, huge singles.
So you saying it's more spiritual? Are you like very soulful and like
Yeah, but
there's something in you that touches you like
even beyond that, when people say they need a record for the club, they're looking for they're looking for a hit record, right? They're generally always looking for a certain formula. My approach is, you take the club, right? Most of us go to a club for 3 or 4 hours, 1 day a week, right?
Yeah.
There's a few hundred more hours in that week. Now, what are we doing during that week? We're driving to work. We're walking our dog.
Cooking.
You're cooking. You're washing your dishes. You're living your life, right?
you're making love.
Right. But what's one of the constant things in most of those activities? You're also listening to music.
100%.
You know what I mean? Like
There's a soundtrack to everything.
Exactly. My thing is, I'd rather just create music for moments in people's lives. You know what I mean? Like, this is a great record to just drive to. This is a great record to go to the club to. This is a great record when you're depressed because your boyfriend or your girlfriend just left you or your wife just left you. And there's a song for all those things. You know what I mean? Like, when you think back to some of your fondest moments, you probably have a song attached to them one way or another. So my approach has just always been make music that makes people feel something at certain moments in their lives. Yeah. Also, I like to make my records for performance. Like, one of the things the approaches that I take when I'm working on a record or writing a song or whatever is, at what point in the Beyonce concert does this song happen?
Okay,
is
that's
this
deep.
The show opener? Is this the show closer? Is this the point in the show where all the lights go black and the crowd doesn't know what's going on? All of a sudden they just hear dun dun dun. They're like, oh shit!
Crazy.
You know what I mean? Like, if you create moments you can also create moments in performances. You know what I mean? And I feel like when you give an artist a record and you paint that picture for them, like say this is the part in your show where such and such happens. all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and the ideas start flowing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I just try to create moments more so than just create hit songs.
Are you involved in the recording process of these records? Do you give input to the rapper when he's in the booth or the singer? Or
Definitely.
Or is that something that contributes to your records?
I mean, that's what producing is. Producing is not making a beat.
Yeah. This is because we're in an era where beat makers are being considered producers,
Right.
and there's such a big difference between a beat maker and a
Right.
producer.
Like if I take a beat and make a beat and email it to you, and you rap on it and send it to me, I didn't produce that song.
No, it's more like you just
I made
facilitated
the beat.
the beat.
You know, and we kind of now if you send me your vocals back and because the truth is that's the way a lot of us work these days. It's a lot more rarer than it used to be for
Yeah.
people to get in the room together. However, if I'm calling you and I say, hey, your second verse, do it like this. Let's change this. I'm gonna take your vocal and move it here. I'm gonna rearrange this part of the
So
song.
you was doing that
Yeah.
actively in the studio
Yes,
with
always.
every artist.
Always.
That's amazing.
You know, I mean, I used to be scared to do that because, when I was younger and I was just starting out, you're kind of scared to tell an artist do their verse over.
Yeah.
You know, or to change something or something's not right. And it took, going back to Jay again, we had a record called Soon You'll Understand. It was on the Dynasty album. And it was really just a loop and drums. And he rapped on it, and we all liked it. And I stayed overnight and made a bunch of changes to it, did some arranging.
He was unaware.
Yeah, he wasn't there.
Yeah.
I did a bunch of overdubs and really just produced it into a song. And I was a little timid to play it for him because I'm like, who am I to change Jay-Z's record around?
Yeah.
And he walks in the studio the next day and I took a shot and I played it for him. And Jay's very nonchalant. He's a short, not short in the literal sense. He's just short in the way he speaks to you sometimes. So I play it for him and the music, the song goes off and he's just like, it's good. And I'm like, what the fuck does this mean? I'm like, so are we cool? So is it cool? He's like, well, yeah, you produced the record. I pay you to produce. I don't just pay you to make beats. Produce.
So-
And he walks out the room. And I'm like, yes.
Crazy. And how do you feel about A&Rs and record labels jumping in once you finish the record with a rapper or a singer or whatever, or even a film, and they come back with I think you need to change the snare, or I don't like the key of that song. Does it piss you off, or do you?
It depends.
How do you feel about that whole? Because I know you come from a very independent, very
Right.
self-thought kind of.
It depends
musical
on
background.
who the person is delivering the message, to be
Okay.
honest. If it's like, Joe Schmo who got his A&R job because his cousin is the vice president,
Yeah.
I'm kind of just looking at him like, all right, this is the record. You know what I mean? But you have some A&Rs who know what they're talking about, they know what they're doing. And, my thing is ultimately, the job of a producer is to deliver a finished product to the label.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to make the label happy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you have to maintain your integrity,
And
the artist has to be happy. You know what I mean? So unless it's something that I feel, if it's something that I feel strongly about, I'll stand my ground. Now the fact of the matter is they paid me to produce a record, so most times they're coming to me for my expertise. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So.
But it's really just the whole thing. It's all a give and take. You know what I mean? This is what I feel. This is what you feel. Let's find a way to meet in the middle and make sure that everybody's happy.
So, still touching on that subject throughout your years in the industry, which you're still pursuing today, how do you feel about record labels, and how is it different to the Rockefeller era, and how you guys were like? Because for me, it felt like a very big family. I don't know the internal,
Right.
I don't know that, but as a fan, when I was listening and enjoying that whole era of Cameron's stuff and Beanie and Dipset and
Right.
Young Guns and everything, and
Right.
I really felt like it was like I was looking at a family. And
That's
how
really
does
what
that
it was.
differ?
Well, if you look at some of the biggest movements in music, not just in hip hop,
Yeah.
if you look at like the Cash Money era, you
Yeah.
look at the Rough Riders era, you look at the Rockefeller era, you look at the Motown era. One of the key things that was very important to all those movements was everybody was under one roof making these songs.
It's like a real
You know what I mean?
energy.
Exactly. There's a certain energy that's in the room when I'm making a beat in one room. Kanye's helping somebody, edit something in another room. Bleak is doing vocals on something else. The Young Guns are in the front writing. Cam is in the office, with Joel's writing something. You know what I mean? And you walk in and it's just this
That's
creative.
insane. It's like a factory.
Right? No, that's what I say. It becomes like a factory or like a workshop.
We've kind of lost that today, I think.
Right. And I think that's one of the big differences today with technology. Technology has allowed us to make records in our bedrooms, in our houses. Great friend of mine has sold 10 million copies of a record 2 years ago. He wrote it in his underwear in his living room. He wrote it, recorded it in his underwear in his living room. You know what I mean? And that's great. But now that things are so accessible and so relatively inexpensive, and studios were so expensive, most labels aren't willing to, to facilitate paying for, $50,000 a month for your crew to be working in the studio. We were one of the last movements that were fortunate enough to have that in that era. But the beauty of it is if you do have a crew, you guys can still all be in somebody's house working. You know what I mean? And with less overhead and less expense. So it's a give and take, The thing is, people are less likely to do that when there isn't one place for everybody to go to. Okay. And that was one of the things that made Baseline special. That's one of the things that made Puff's old studio, Daddy's House, special.
I've been there,
Right. Oh, really?
It was amazing. I went up one lift.
Right.
And then you go in and there's like a reception area, then there's a studio on the left. And then a small studio on the right.
Yeah, they had 3 rooms
wow.
there.
Yeah, 3 rooms.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that made those places special, was that when you walked in, it was just constant creative energy everywhere.
So it's like music is in a sense, what you're saying is a form of energy or a spark that's secured in an MP3, and every time you play that, you can feel the energy in the studio.
Exactly. And on top of that, when you have all these people working on different things, everybody's bouncing ideas off each other, or everybody's getting inspired by each other. I walk in the room and hear something, and I'm like, yo, that's crazy. This just gave me an idea. And I go back in the room, and now I'm making something. And then Ye walks in the room, and he's like, yo, those horns are crazy. Show me how you did that. Okay. So I'm like, all right, boom, boom, boom.
Was it competitive at the time with Kanye West? How did you feel the whole Rockefeller?
I'm not a competitive person in general.
Yeah.
No knock to anybody who is competitive. I look at it like, if I'm secure in what I'm doing, I don't really need to compete with what you're doing.
Because you're great yourself.
Yeah, I'm good and you're good. So we can just make each other better.
It's just more love, basically.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not listening to what you're doing and saying, all right, I have to outdo you. To me, that's insecurity.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? At least for us, in terms of myself and him, people always thought that there was a lot of competition. And sometimes, I'd hear something and be like, damn. But that would just motivate me to go make something great. It wouldn't make me mad. You know what I mean? Again, just with a lot of the artists, that's really what it was. We were inspiring each other. Trying to outdo each other, but not from necessarily a place of competitive.
Like a good sport,
exactly.
Like friendly sport, like playing PlayStation or something.
Exactly. Like, you made that. Listen to this.
Cool.
Boom. Oh, you made that. Listen to this.
Yeah. So you're just both motivating each other.
Exactly.
Crazy. I just also wanted to touch on a producer's block, and if you've ever got producer's block, or if there's been grey days in the studio when you've come in and you just can't produce, and how did you overcome that? Because for me personally, I get producer's block a lot more since I'm more making more and more records.
Right.
I find it hard sometimes to inspire myself. I find it hard sometimes to write, and I've got my methods which I've learned throughout the years of what unblocked my brain so I can be creative again. But what was some of the moments for you where you kind of got out that, or do you even get producer's block? I don't know.
I think that's something that we all get.
What would you suggest? Sorry.
Yeah, to be honest, I just walk away.
Yeah.
I go just walk away and do something else. Go cook or do something else that you like doing. Because it also, one of the things that I live by is if you're spending that much time on the song, it's probably not a great song. You know what I mean? Like most of my biggest records.
It's true.
Most of my biggest records, the initial framework of those records were done in 15, 20 minutes. Like, I made the beat or the basic beat in 5 or 10 minutes. The artist kind of had the rhyme, or the songwriter had the rhyme, or I had the hook. And the ideas came together super quick. And then we might spend hours tweaking it and producing it into a song, or into what it needs to be. But those creative sparks generally, in my opinion, or in my experience, the biggest and best ones in my career happened relatively quickly.
Same. I can totally agree.
Dude, oh boy, I made that beat.
I bought that record, by the way.
Wow. Thanks.
Sav did. Where are you, Sav? Yeah, that's my brother. We was DJing vinyl and he brought it, and we used to speed it up into because we have a genre here called grime in London.
Yeah,
so he would speed it up and we'd mix into it, and it was like, oh boy.
I can't even imagine a grime version of Oh Boy. That's gonna sound crazy.
Yeah, that was such a great beat, man. Please, let's have a round of applause for that, man, because seriously,
thank you.
That was such a great production, honestly.
But my point in bringing that record up was I made the beat in like 5 minutes.
What was you thinking? How was you feeling?
Well, initially,
what happened? Could you just tell me before?
Initially,
that day?
I envisioned it as an up-tempo record. It was like 95 BPM.
Yeah. And
it was not good.
How did you find the sample?
I mean, it's a well-known soul record. Like, you know, Rolls Royce, I'm Going Down was from a movie called Car Wash, which was a very popular movie in the States.
Was you sitting on it for a while, or did you just that morning?
No, I just had the idea right then and there.
Okay.
And I flipped it, and it wasn't good. And then I took it and did it over into the second version, which is the version that came out.
Yeah.
But my point is, I made the beat in about 5 minutes, and it sat on a CD for about 6 months. Jay wanted to hold it, and then one of our A&Rs played it for Cam. Cam was like, yo, that's dope. They went in, did the vocals. That record was on the radio 10 minutes after it was done.
No way. That's crazy.
And that's what I mean by the spontaneity, like when something's supposed to happen.
Jewels, boom, in.
Yeah, like they left the studio, took it to Hot 97, gave it, I think, to Angie Martinez, who had the afternoon show at the time, and they aired it right away. And it went into rotation right then and there. The record wasn't even mixed. We had to go back and like actually do the mix and then send it to the radio, but the radio already had the demo version in their computer in rotation. So for like, it used to drive me nuts because for like the first month that record was huge, every radio station was playing the demo version. You know,
that's mad.
Yeah, but my point is, I made the beat in a few minutes. Cam and Joel did their vocals in like 30 minutes, and it was on the radio 10 minutes after that.
Crazy. In terms, touching on what you said about it wasn't mixed. As a producer, over the years, I've always tried to wonder and find people to mix my records or my instrumentals or whatever, and they've never come back to the way I imagined them to sound.
Because they didn't make them, you did.
Yeah, so do you think it's important for you to be, as a producer, to really be behind the mix, or?
That is the most important thing. Not to say that you have to be a super all-star engineer, but you have to learn how to engineer. You have to learn how to speak the language that engineers speak.
Yeah.
Study things like, study great sounding records and figure out sonically what makes them sound great.
Yeah.
You know, when I was younger, you know, when I was a kid and I had like a 4-track, a Tascam cassette 4-track machine, you know, I would sit there agonizing for hours trying to figure out why my records didn't sound like the records I heard on the radio. Yeah. Not knowing that people weren't really making records on 4-track cassette, you know, machines. You know, but I studied so much even back then, you know, how equalization worked, how compression worked, you know, and things like that, so I could not just make great music, but make great sounding music. And by the time I got into the studio, one of the reasons why engineers would like working with me was because I could speak their language. Yeah. So even if there was another engineer mixing the record, there's a difference between saying to an engineer, you know, give me 5 more dB at 10K, you know, on an EQ, as opposed to saying, yo, turn the bass up.
Yeah, I hate that.
Turn the bass up can mean a zillion and one things.
Yeah, it's mental.
But when you can say to him, back up off the compression, I feel like it's squeezing the life out of my kick, and instead boost it, you know, around 100 hertz or whatever. Now you're speaking his language. So even if you're not the mix engineer, you know, you can communicate exactly what you want. Now the difference, to follow up on that, the more you learn to speak that language, and the more you understand what this outboard gear does. We're now with more plugins than outboard gear, but when you can speak that language, and you understand what these pieces are doing, then it becomes that much easier to do it yourself. You know, like, for the majority of my career, like, most of my records were ultimately mixed by me. You know, I would have
the vocals to the whole.
I would have an engineer cross my T's, dot my I's, and you know, do the fine tooth comb work. But I try to just deliver them as much of a finished product as possible. Now, I wasn't always as good at that as I am now. You know, that came with practice and time. But I've always tried to have a foot in both worlds. You know, and the difference today versus back then is, like, I'd make a beat on an MPC. and then we would track it to, we'd take it and split it out through all the outputs, dump it to 2-inch tape or dump it to Pro Tools, and then the engineer now has to, if you're leaving it to an engineer, the reason why it doesn't come back sounding like you feel like it was going to is because this guy who didn't make the record is now taking all of your sounds and your vocals and everything, and he's breaking that record apart.
In his perspective.
Right, but he's also breaking the record apart.
Yeah.
He's breaking up the energy that was in that record. So now he's taking the kick, EQing the kick the way he thinks he should.
Totally changing
taking the snare, and all of a sudden that cohesiveness in the record is gone.
Yeah.
The beauty of today is that we can mix as we're making the record.
100%.
You know what I mean? So by the time you do take it to an engineer, it should really just be, it shouldn't be, give me your interpretation of my song. It should be, cross my T's, dot my I's, keep the context of my record, and all you're doing is fixing certain frequencies or certain things that may need to be handled. Yeah. But it's not even always just making it louder. I think it's more so about making sure that, like, say for example, the vocals may be a little bit harsh in the top mid. All right, adjust that. You know what I mean? I might have a little bit too much sub, and I don't have great speakers at home, so you may hear something that I don't hear. So go and adjust my, my sub.
With engineers though, when you give them your parts, they tend to mix. They tend to take out a lot. That's what annoys me. To take out a lot of bottom, a lot of mid. Yeah. So I like to just make them. I give it to them with how I want it, and you just make it louder.
Like I said, it's to them like it's. I mean, we're kind of saying the same thing. It's shape it. Shape the overall record. Don't change my record. You know what I mean? Yeah. But the more you learn about engineering from the technical standpoint, the less you have to worry about that. In general, because nobody's going to interpret. Nobody's going to ever be in your head.
Yeah, 100%.
You know what I mean? Except for you.
I just wanted to touch on when you was like earlier on. You said about I used to sleep in the studio, and it's a quote that I've heard a lot of people and a lot of successful producers say, that they literally sleep in the studio or get no sleep. I know Nana and myself have done the same thing. I just wanted to say that, do you feel it's healthy, and do you think you could come to a crash? Is there ever a moment where you're not sleeping enough and not dieting properly as a producer, and really passionate and addicted? Is that safe? How do you feel, because you're such a veteran in the game, looking back at all the times? Is it healthy, or is it like, how do you, like, what's your take?
It's all about balance. It's all about balance. For me, it was like, I might spend 3 days in the studio, but then I'm going home for 3 days. You know what I mean? And I'm not doing anything related.
Like completely no music.
Yeah, you know what I mean? These days, I'm fortunate enough, I've shut my studio down since, and I built a room in my house. So
I'm not surprised.
Right, so
in your 400 room house.
Something like that. So it's, now I had the advantage of just saying, okay, I'm gonna go to bed now, and when I wake up, the studio will still be there. You know what I mean? As opposed to having to get in the car and going somewhere to go to work. Now, to be honest, when I didn't have a 400 room house, when I had a 1-bedroom apartment, not even a 1-bedroom, like a studio apartment, I don't say I hated working at home, but I hated waking up next to the drum machine.
Because it's like,
you need that space to get away from that. Yeah. Now that I have a full-on room at home, it's just, you close the door, you go watch a movie, whatever, come back when you feel like it.
You take the Segway through the house.
I skateboard through the house. I don't have a Segway in the house, but I do have a skateboard at the house that I used to get from the West Wing to the East Wing.
Crazy.
But no, seriously, there's something to be said for that separation, and you really do need to, maintain balance between your creativity and the hard work and the grind and your health, not just physical health but mental health.
I think that's important too.
Because the healthier you are, the more creative you can be. You know what I mean? The more mentally relaxed you are, the easier it is to get those ideas out.
Did you hit the gym during this period? Like
during my
was you not a gym guy? Because I'm not a gym guy.
Like during my hard grind period, no, I probably could have made better health decisions back then. But there's just so much happening, and when you're in the midst of it, and you're making 3 records a day, and you're mixing 5 records a week, you kind of don't even realize it. And then one day you wake up and you're 30, 35, and you're like, shit, I've been staring at these 4 walls for the past 10 years.
Yeah.
You know, and not getting outside and not getting any sun and just not taking the time.
Did you have a girlfriend at the time?
Yeah.
Do you think it's important to have a girlfriend? Do you think it's a distraction? What do you feel? Because I've been
That's an
single for
interesting
10
question.
years now,
It's a
and
very
I feel
interesting
great.
question. I think it's good to have a support system.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Sometimes I feel like I need a hug, but then I hear a new sound and I'm just like, yo.
Right. And that sound gives you the hug.
Like my
That is your
dream,
hug.
like
Yeah.
that.
No, it's good to have the support system, you know, of a significant other. It is. But it can be hard, you know, because fortunately, you know, especially during the period that we're talking about, you know, the girl that I was with was in the business as well.
Okay.
So
Similarities, opinion, conversation.
yeah, but also just they understand that like the lifestyle.
She gets it.
Yeah,
Yeah, she
they understand
gets
the
it.
lifestyle. You know, because there's a lot of long hours. There's a lot of travel involved and things like that. So when you're in that same business, it's easier to have somebody whose lifestyle complements yours, even if they don't do the same thing. You know, currently now, you know, like that's not something that I have to worry about as much because, you know, it's like, you know, I'm not out running the streets, you know, wilding out. Like I'm sitting here, you know, doing this, and then I'm going to my room and I'm going to sleep. You know, when you have a good healthy relationship, there's a certain amount of security that comes with that.
I understand.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's really that's really the most important thing is not only having a relationship, it's not just having a relationship, it's having a healthy and secure relationship, and somebody that's going to be your cheerleader the same way you're going to be their cheerleader.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Touching on one more question I wanted to ask you, how do you remain so humble with such great success and being around, you know, part of an era of hip hop and up until still today? How do you remain so humble, and do you still teach yourself new things? And what advice would you give to a producer if they're developing egos early into success? And like, what is the advice on that?
Well, I'll give you a few points on that. For one, if I ever...
I see sorry to butt in. I see a lot of producers changing. You know, we live in a social media era where loads of followers are coming. They're getting their likes. They're getting the flash jewels.
Right.
And they, you know, it kind of the music kind of sometimes doesn't. It's not the thing anymore. You know what they promise to God, like, God, please give me that. I promise I'll be good. And they get there and they're just like this whole like.
Well, for one, my mom.
You're such a humble person with like insane amount of success. How do you remain so humble?
Well, I mean, like I said, for one, you know, my mom's would whoop my ass if I was out here acting crazy and reckless to people. You know, you get back what you put out there. I try to always maintain putting out good energy, positive energy, you know, and just ultimately just have fun with it, because that's what music is supposed to be fun. You know what I mean? On top of that, I've seen many successful people come and go.
Yeah.
I've seen many successful producers come and go. I've seen guys that were hot 2 years ago are not hot now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I've always been able to maintain one way or another some sort of relevance in my industry.
Yeah.
You know, and a lot of that really comes from like because you have those periods where everybody's calling you because you have 5 #1 records in a row, right? And then you go cold and you have one record on the radio, then you don't have a record on the radio for 6 months, right? But because you've always done good business with people, because you've always done fair business with people, and because people have a good experience working with you, you always get a call.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because everybody's going to be calling you when you have 10 hits, you know, under your belt, you know, within that year. If you're an asshole, pardon my language, during that period, people are only going to work with you when they have to. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things where it's like, I'm dealing with his ego because he's the biggest producer in the world right now.
Yeah, like, let me just take it, kind of like, whatever.
Right, like, I'll deal with that because I'm going to get a hit record out of it. But when you're not hot, that phone's going to stop ringing very quickly. Yeah. You know, and I think...
So your advice is stay humble, stay quiet, keep learning.
Yeah, just,
Don't get gassed.
Stay low. Stay low, and just remember that this shit can be taken from you. It's not even that it can be taken from you. Somebody else is going to come in and do something new.
Resonating at a different energy.
Right, and there's going to be a different energy out there and a different sound, and, you know, what you're going to get after that is really dependent on what you did when you were hot. You know what I mean? Also, I think one of the other things that always gave me a different perspective was working in a recording studio for years and seeing a lot of the hot producers come and go. And like, A lot of the hot A&Rs come and go. And I was the guy that used to have to get their coffee or, pick up their tapes from another session, or just, I was the guy who did everything. And sometimes those guys would be jerks. And then you fast forward 10 years later and they're looking for help with something.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And I'm not a vindictive person. I'm still going to extend that hand. If I'm in a position to help you, I'm always going to do that. I'll never forget it though. I'm not going to forget when you shitted on me when I was 18. Yeah. But I'm not going to hold you. I'm not going to hold you to the wall for it. Yeah. But people don't forget those things. Yeah. Just maintain good energy, good vibes. You'll always get back what you put out.
Dope, man. Wait, one more question, because I really wanted to get this in. Is there any producers and songwriters in the building? Yeah? Okay, so everyone here. Great.
Everybody.
So I just wanted to. We're all chasing a publishing deal, right? We're all trying to get that check,
right?
And we're working hard. And we live in an environment now where there's major independent brands that can offer you self-publishing, right. And then there's still the majors. So what is your take on being such a veteran in the game and being so experienced? Where are you at with publishing, and what would you suggest? Because right now everyone's getting snapped up.
I come from a different era, right? I'm not saying that people don't get high production fees anymore, but it's not like it used to be. I used to walk into a room for 30 minutes, make a beat. 2 days later, I have a check for $80,000 for producing one song.
That's crazy.
Like when I was doing my work with Rockefeller, we did a mass deal. I never signed to them. What we did was basically, we like your work. We're going to cut you a check for 20 beats at $30,000 a beat. And we're going to give you the first half now, and as each song is finished, we cut you your back end for each song. So I was 18, 19. I remember my ex pulls me to the side like, "Do you realize how much money you made in the past 6 months?" I'm 19 years old. She's like, "Yo, you made $500,000 in the past 6 months." Crazy. And I purposely didn't used to look at the money, so I didn't even know these things. You know what I mean? And like, to be a kid who was working at a skating rink and like working at Aeropostale, which was a clothing store in the mall, to all of a sudden, making that kind of money, it was mind blowing. And as time progressed, publishers would come calling. Warner Chappell, $2 million offer. Sony Music Publishing, $1.5 million offer. These different companies were offering me anywhere between $1 and $3 million. And my former manager always used to say, "Don't do it. Once you do that, depending on how you structure the deal, that's money that you can live off of forever. If you give that away, that's it. And then you're getting taxed to hell. If you get a $3 million check, the government's coming for 49% of that. Yeah. So, and on top of that, you're losing half of your publishing. And on top of that, in the past 6 months, you just made $500,000. And you did that while owning your music. So, now again, this is a different era. I didn't do a publishing deal, and I did I didn't do the traditional give it all away deal, but I didn't do one until 2 years ago.
Crazy, with a big catalog.
Yeah, I waited until I had 20 years worth of music under my belt to then say, okay, you know what, you want to own 40% of it? Here, cut this check. And it wasn't even like, a thing where it was like tens of millions of dollars. What it was I now have amassed this huge catalog that you as a publisher can now go and exploit. So I've always gotten...
Like go and do some more.
Right. Like I've always gotten a couple of movie trailers a year, or a couple of movie scores a year, or a couple of video game placements a year. But now it's like... But that was just off of people who were fans. This guy, the editor is cutting a scene in the movie, and he loves this song. He wants to license it. Here, take it. And I would do it as a self-published thing. But that was maybe like once or twice a year. Now there's somebody whose job is to do nothing but call movie studios, music supervisors, editing houses and whatnot, and their job is to get my music placed in these other various, forms of media. But again, that was because I was able to do that because I came from a different era where I was making so much money, I wasn't stressing those little $2 million deals. I know that nowadays there aren't really budgets for producers to get $30,000, $40,000 for making records. So as a producer, the hustle these days is the publishing deal. I like to lean more towards admin deals, where it's like, you know, you might get only half as much money, but you still own 100% of your publishing. So what happens is the publisher administers your rights, and in exchange they get 25% of whatever they make, but you still own everything. So when the term is up, and you decide to go find another publisher to do another admin deal, you still own 100% of that publisher. I think ultimately what it comes down to is how bad do you need the money, you know? And I know for a lot of us, if we're trying to do this full time, we need to live, so we need that. Some of us chase that check out of necessity, you know. And I totally get it. But like I said, I'd like to try to lean more towards administration deals than publishing deals. And outside of that, you know, it really just comes down to necessity. You know, it's more so than anything else. I think that's one of the, I guess, drawbacks of the change in technology is that, you know, the way the budgets have changed, it's harder for producers and songwriters to make a living, you know? I feel like a lot of us are now pushed more towards having to do the publishing deals as opposed to doing them when you want to do them.
That's crazy.
I want to take it back to production side of things a little bit. Like, obviously, Akai has been very influential in how hip-hop came to be.
Of course.
How much do you, well, all of you, think that your gear defines your sound? Like, how much of an influence has the gear on what you make?
I've been talking so much. I'll let one of you guys take this first.
What was the question? Like, how much does it influence? Like, what I use? How much does it influence my production? To be honest, I'm just a Fruity Loops guy. I use FL Studio. It was the only thing we could kind of get hold of back in the day because we couldn't afford anything else in it. So, but yeah, we just cracked, and just made do of what we had. And my sound is more inspired by London culture and underground garage music, and yeah, it's just I just have my own perspective. It's my own canvas, but yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm pretty the same. So over the years, I just use a keyboard and a computer. That's it. The software. I
think coming from an era where outboard, you know, it was an outboard gear era. You know, drum machines like the MPC, the ASR, the SP1200. Every one of those, and then from MPCs, from one MPC to another, from the 60 to the 3000 to the 4000 to the 2500. All of these machines had their unique qualities, different converters. Because they had different converters, they sounded different. The SP1200 was a 12-bit sampling machine, so it had a specific sound. You know, the MPC 3000 had a very unique quantization swing. You know, so in that essence, like, you know, yes, there were things that you could do on an SP1200, or there was a sound you could get out of the SP1200 that you couldn't get out of the 3000. But also vice versa, there were things that you could get out of an MPC 3000 that you couldn't get out of a 12. So my approach was always used to be the machine that I'm using. Like, I had my core machine, and my core machines were generally always MPCs. But there were times where I said if I need a certain sound, I would have to break out the SP, or I would have to break out the ASR. You know, these days, the beauty of having things like the MPC Live or the X, you know, is that you can apply a lot of those different approaches all in that same box. Like, if I wanted to sound like an SP1200, then I'm just going into 12-bit mode on the MP. You know what I mean? If I can get more scientific with the swing now. You know, if I'm sequencing in Logic, I can import the swing of an SP1200 directly into Logic. You know, FL Studio has a sound that no other DAW has. We were just talking about this yesterday. You know, like, there's a certain cleanliness there's a certain punch rather in FL that you can't get easily in any other DAW. You know what I mean? It's the way that engine saturates, especially on the low end and on the low mids. It's not to say that you can't do it in Logic, but in FL, it's kind of just a matter of pushing the faders up.
It's crazy because I notice when a tune's made in Logic or FL, I just know. I don't know, it's weird.
No, you can.
And then if I don't know, I'm like, what did you make that? And then it'll come up with like Ableton or something else, or some Sonar or something. I was like, what the fuck is that? Like,
yeah, now you can listen to a record and kind of tell when it's made in Ableton. You know what I mean? So I feel like the gear that you use can definitely have an impact on your sound. But it's not to say. But the beauty of today's technology is we can kind of mimic these different sounds depending on what we use.
And do you feel that today's technology, as in like how music is consumed through streaming and phones and headphones, does it change your sound or your approach in producing?
There are adjustments that we make now, like most of us consume our music now on our phones in those little white earbuds. That's probably the most important reference that you need. You know what I mean? I remember sitting with 40, Drake's yacht, and he was telling me how he mixed the majority of, what was the first album? Was it Thank Me Later? In a hotel room, and his final reference was the hotel alarm clock speakers. When they were in a rush and they had to get Best I Ever Had out to radio, he mixed the final reference on the hotel alarm clock speakers.
Crazy.
But it's just like in big studios when we use NS10s. They're terrible sounding speakers, but if you can get them to sound good on those, it's going to sound great on real speakers.
That's what TM88 did with EXO Tour Life. He done it on the Beats pill.
Right.
For Little Uzi, and it's such a great hit.
Yeah.
It's mad, isn't it?
Another thing I would say that technology has changed music, the way producers make music, is that now we're talking about, is the song too long now? So now we got to make shorter songs. So now we're having discussions like, the song's 3 minutes 30, it needs to be shorter now. Yeah. So that's a big change nowadays.
Yeah, I remember when the standard was 420, and then it went down to 4 minutes, and it's like now, in and out, 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes straight.
Yeah, get in and get out. But to be honest, I kind of like that because it's like, at least for radio, it's like get the people the most important part of the record, and that's that. I was out at Rebel Music Academy for a couple of weeks in Berlin. I actually came we just finished that, and there was this girl who had this amazing. I'm gonna say amazing. It was a really good song. It was 9 minutes long, and I'm like, she's trying to get me to help her mix the record and kind of arrange it, and I'm like, this record doesn't need a mix, it just needs to be cut. Nobody wants to listen to, especially for the type of song it was, nobody wants to hear 9 minutes of that. Now, if you're talking about house music, deep house, where it's more about the journey of the song, whole different thing. If you're going for radio, if you're trying to make a pop record, nobody wants to hear a 9 minute pop record. You know what I mean?
The radio host is going to get exhausted. Right.
Because it's the same hook and chorus and, pop parts over and over. So because she was so attached to the record, because, it came from her, she couldn't imagine any of those sections missing. But sometimes you need that. Sometimes you need a third party to come in and say, you don't really need this part. You don't need this part. You can take that out. You can take this out. And at the end, what you should be left with is the core of a great song. And that's really all you need.
So do you guys take into account stuff like the first 30 seconds in streaming that people are prone to skip tracks? Because you have a very long intro on
100%.
Fortunate enough for him, it's a Drake song, so someone would listen to that for an hour before you fucking started singing, bro.
Hey, man. No, but the first 5 seconds, 10 seconds are really important because I switch songs off straight away if I don't like the beat. In the first 5 seconds, I change. I shouldn't, but I do. So I think it's important. So I try to do the same when I'm making music. Yeah.
No, I think for me, it's the song's got to be strung out the gate. I had this one producer friend who's fairly successful. He's been making big records he's made some great records over the past 15, 20 years. But he always used to have problems getting placements. He'd have a huge hit record, and then 6 months would go by. Then you get another one, and he always used to complain. Not complain, but he always used to just try to figure out why. And one day he came to the studio and he sat with me, and I realized, bro, all of your intros are a minute long before you even get to the song. So and I'm saying this as a producer, but also as your friend, I don't want to hear your 1 minute intro. So imagine when you're sitting there with an artist playing the music. By the time your record gets to the point, or by the time your beat gets to the point, they don't care anymore. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that that's something that's common in general, whether you're in the streaming era, the analog era, whatever it is. You got to give people a good song out the gate. You know, I think one of the keys to my success, especially like from like 2000 to like 2007, when I was making a lot of up-tempo records, I always used to build my intros with DJs in mind, with mix show DJs in mind. Give them something to do, you know, to cut up and do tricks with. So when you have that, you know, that the 5 o'clock, the hot mix at 5, or the quick mix at noon or whatever, DJs would be more apt to like do tricks with your record and keep bringing it back and playing it over and over because you gave them an intro to juggle and have fun with. You know, I think that that's one thing, that's one common complaint I get from a lot of radio DJs now, and even in club DJs as well, is like nowadays they just kind of have to play the record. People aren't really building their records with DJs in mind anymore. And that's unfortunate, but the kind of truth is DJs don't break records. Records don't get broken by DJs as much as they used to. Yeah. They're now broken through playlists, streaming playlists. You know what I mean? So the DJs kind of become less of a factor in that, unfortunately.
Just touching on what Blaze just said, in the UK, in London especially, I was having a hard time breaking the rappers I was working with into the clubs. And that's because we was arranging the songs differently, and it was real hardcore rap, and it was real gully. And it wasn't until I met Mo Stack and Mist did I start shortening my intros and dropping the chorus straight at the track. And the crowd started reacting straight away, and it got them moving straight away. So my technique was like 8 bars, bang, chorus. Everyone goes crazy and it's done. Then it goes into the verse, and people can handle the verse more this time. And they know the chorus is coming. So I kind of more look like for a catchy entrance with the hook.
Definitely.
And most of my biggest songs in London are all, if you look at them, they all start and then they slap straight into the hook. So yeah.
I think we have a couple of minutes, 5 minutes left. So if anybody has questions, the microphone right there.
So you use a lot of samples in your music, and you've probably had some moments where you weren't able to clear the sample. Can you maybe give an example where you felt like really gutted that you weren't able, or the label wasn't able to clear the sample?
I don't really have too many stories like that, fortunately, because I was always smart with what I sampled. Like, I'm not even gonna attempt to go sample like the Rolling Stones or the Beatles. Like, why would you set yourself up for failure? The Beatles have some amazing music that would be great samples. I'm not playing that game. That said, funny enough, I did sample Paul McCartney for a Rick Ross record, and he loved it and he cleared it, and I was like, what? Like, my plan was we did the record, and my plan was I was gonna bring in live musicians to just play something that felt like what we sampled without it actually being that sample. The label jumped the gun and sent it out to the UK, like directly to Paul. And when I found that out, I'm like, why would you do that? Because the thing is like once you put it on somebody's radar, now they're looking. Like one record that I did with Eminem, we sampled Journey, and it was their idea to do it. It's not something I normally would have done, but they requested it, so we did the record. And they sent it to they got the record and they said, no, not only no, they said no, hell no. And if you even make anything that sounds remotely close to this, we will sue the shit out of you. That was their exact words. Like the lawyer came back with that quote from them. So we had to then go back and deviate entirely from the idea. You know, but yeah, for me it's just more so like just being smart with what you sample.
Blaze, just touching on that quickly, just for me personally, Did you ever lose a lot of money sampling something, and how is there ever a time that when you structured the deal with the sample with the person that you were sampling, has anybody tried to like override your like creativity and like the finances, and how does it work?
It's always different. But when going back to what I was saying about trying to be smart with what you sample, there are situations where like, for example, I did a record for Jadakiss 2 years ago, and I knew the guy, the guy that I sampled, an artist named Don Blackman. I know Don's son, so before any labels got involved, I called Kyle, his son, and I was like, "Listen, this is what we're gonna do. I'm going to sample your dad's record. I had the multi-tracks already from somebody who worked at the label that owned the master. I'm going to pay you this much, and we're going to split it 50-50. He's like, great, that's money I didn't know I had.
The perks of being Just Blaze, eh?
Right, you know what I mean?
Crazy.
For example, I have another friend who what he does for a living is he basically does license deals. He goes and hunts around the world for rare rock, rare soul. He tracks down these random musicians who made one record back in 1965, and he basically approaches them and says, hey, I'm going to give you $5,000. I want the rights to your record for the next 10 years. These guys haven't even thought about making a record in 30 years. So they're like, fine, you're giving me $5,000 for something I did 40 years ago? Fine. But then he'll call me and be like, all right, this is what I bought this month. And sends me a hard drive full of samples, and then he and I work out a deal. You know what I mean?
Cool. Just touching in quickly, because I know the time's running out. Also, I was watching one of these beat breakdowns, and the producer was producing Furthest Thing for Drake or something, and the guys
Jake.
Didn't clear.
Jake.
Jake. And they didn't clear the sample, so he went and found someone that could recreate the sample.
Yeah.
Have you ever done that? And
I do that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. The trick with that is, if you just go and recreate the sample exactly, you don't have to clear the usage of the original master. You still have to clear the publishing. So what I try to do is bring in musicians and replay it, but change it just enough where it's now a new composition. And that's really the easiest way and the best way to make your money and keep your publishing. Actually, I'm giving away a secret, but some of the best guys to do that is two dudes in London, actually. They're called Replay Heaven.
No, put that down in your phone.
Yeah, Replay Heaven. No, seriously. Shout out to Hal. These guys, I mean, I've been working with them for years. There's also a guy in the States, he's an old mentor of mine. His name is Ken Lewis. He's great at it, but he does so much work as a mix engineer. He's the guy who put me on to Replay Heaven. Can
I get your secret folder as well while we're here?
Sure.
Get your drums and...
Oh, yeah. I don't have my laptop. If you come by the hotel later, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, we're going to chill out, man. I can't wait.
All right, cool. That's a lot of people. I have a small room. No, but actually, the last thing I'm going to say in regards to that, I actually... if you go to Splice, and Akai and Splice have actually just partnered up. If you go to Splice, I have a drum kit on there. It's actually, I think there's 2 on there. There's drum rolls, kicks, snares, 808s, transition synths, whatever. Sign up for Splice, you can grab that. And then I actually, it was a charity thing that I did with Run the Jewels 2 years ago. I actually gave out on Twitter all of my old drums from like 1999 to like 2007. If you just Google Just Blaze Meow the Drums, instead of just Meow the Jewels, I think. Was it? No, Meow the Drums. Yeah, Just Blaze Meow the Drums. If you Google that, the folder will come right up. It's on Run the Jewels website. You can download it in 2 seconds.
Just touching on that quickly, man. We could be here all day, but is there a lot of money in making your own kits, and do you recommend producers that are struggling with finances to kind of maybe...
It's a good hustle. I didn't do it for the money.
No, but it's just like maybe you don't got a publishing deal yet or something.
But I have made some money doing it. Yeah. I think...
Is it a great amount of money, or is it not the same?
If I had to put a number on it, it paid like 7 months of mortgage.
What kind of mortgage though? Because that's a very...
A 400-room house mortgage.
Room house mortgage.
A $400 million
a month.
All right.
Cool.
On that note, please give it up for the guests.
Yo.
Thank you, everybody.
I just want to say it's an honor to be and share the stage with you. Thank you very much, man. Thank you very much. Make some noise for Just Blaze, Nano Rogues. You don't know.